Welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer. I'm your host, Sarah Bueno. I'm a psychotherapist, teacher, consultant, and most importantly, a wounded healer, living and working in Chicago, Illinois.
And I'm your host, Anne Remy. I'm a counseling psychotherapist, yoga teacher, and trauma specialist living in Brighton, UK. On this show, we interview folks in a variety of healing professions, and we discuss the intersectional journey of healing self while caring for others.
But we're not just focused on individual healing, but also healing on the collective level, from white supremacy, late-stage capitalism, and the patriarchy. Thanks for joining us. Hi, Anne.
Oh, hi, Sarah. How you doing?
Well,
yeah. The world.
Yeah. So, being that this is the first time we are in front of the mic since the Middle East conflict has erupted, we wanted to at least acknowledge and, we just spent 20 minutes talking about how we want to do this. Do you want to start?
Yeah. So it goes without saying, but we're going to say it anyways, that our hearts are with the innocent victims of conflict on either side of any border, really, in any situation. And we think that all people should be able to live without fear of anything like this ever happening to them.
Yep.
And that we both recognize that this conflict is the direct result of colonization and white supremacy. And it feels really important to say that.
Yep. White supremacy is winning. Like, no matter who you are in this conflict, white supremacy is the winner. And that fucking sucks.
And that's not to label one side or the other as white supremacists. It's to say that this conflict comes about from a history of white supremacy and colonization.
Yep.
And it's really important context to know that. I also want to acknowledge that I am not unbiased in this situation because I did live in Lebanon for a brief time. So as much as that kind of informs my opinion and my understanding of the situation, it does feel important to disclose that I cannot be unbiased. And I know that, Sarah, you're in the process of learning more about the history of this conflict. And I think it's so important and incredible that you are doing that.
Well, the coolest thing that's happened, because I posted a couple things on Instagram that honestly are pretty, not talking about the conflict as much itself, but talking about the process of learning and, inviting other people to learn with me. And the coolest thing that's happened is, while there are definitely people who have posted shitty responses and, are saying that I'm supporting a Holocaust or genocide or whatever it is, people that know me, and it's not even people that I know, for real, but my Instagram friends, people have been DMing me and hey, I've been listening to this podcast. Or I have had 2 Jewish friends who have contacts in Israel say, hey, would you love to have a conversation about this? And I'm like, yes. And somebody sent me a podcast yesterday, and then I listened to it almost immediately. And I messaged her back right away. She's like, oh my God, I can't believe you're listening to it. And I'm like, I'm not making this up. When I say I'm educating myself, I'm actually doing it.
Yeah.
Right. So I think that's the coolest thing that for me that's come out of this is I am, even though it's kind of a small minority, I am seeing people come together to help each other understand. Because that's what has been pissing me off more than anything about the conflict is fucking horrific. Duh. But aside from that, it's kind of like pain versus suffering, right? Pain exists and it's there, and you can't necessarily have a life without pain, but suffering is the option. And I think that we're creating a lot of suffering by going at each other. Somebody came at me on social media and I'm like, you don't know me. You see what I posted and you're making a ton of assumptions. And I know that a lot of people are doing performative allyship, but why? Why are you coming at me? Why? So don't fucking come at people. Invite them along with you.
Yeah. And I think that shame is never a way to learn or to teach or to motivate.
Right.
And I think, that tenet actually transitions very well, queen of the segue, into my conversation with Olive today.
Yes.
So
you are the queen of the segue.
Nailed it. So Olive and I have a really interesting conversation about bodies and about how we work with our bodies and how we use our bodies and how we exercise our bodies. And just a content warning, we do talk about history of eating disorder, and we talk about issues around losing weight and working out. And if that's something that you're sensitive to, this may not be the episode for you.
Well, and I was just going to share with listeners something that you and I just talked about before we started recording. And I'm going to ask our editor to bleep out a couple things, which I've never bleeped an episode before because I love cussing. So I will never bleep a cuss word. But you and Olive both share how much you weigh or
Mm.
have weighed. And as soon as numbers were said, I started shaming myself
Mhm.
instantly. And I
Mhm.
got completely distracted and totally off of the topic of what you were actually saying. And so even though there's nothing offensive about how much you weigh,
Mhm.
I want to bleep it just so that listeners don't get hijacked
Yeah.
and miss the good message that y'all were actually sharing.
Yeah, and so I think it's so important that you brought that up in your own experience of hearing that. And as you'll hear, Olive and I are sharing kind of our own journeys with our relationships with our bodies and how that's evolved through yoga and through exercise and through eating. And, I think when we talk about shame, there is so much that we carry around our bodies. And whether it's educating yourself on certain situations, whether it's your relationship with your body or with food or with exercise, there is nothing to be ashamed of. You're
Mhm.
doing the best you can. And that feels like a very important message in today's climate and
Yeah,
with today's topic, really.
I dig.
Yeah. So, with that being said, I would love to introduce you to my friend Olive. Olive Walton is a movement coach who shares movement practices from yoga to strength training mobility to handstands and leads with curiosity and playfulness for the body and mind. Olive's bio is short and sweet, and I like it. And it explains exactly what she does. So please enjoy this episode with Olive.
Are you a therapist stepping into leadership for the first time? Or maybe you've been in a leadership position for a while but are bumping up against new struggles. It's a transformative journey and one that can be deeply rewarding but also filled with unique challenges. Many therapists find themselves in leadership positions because of their exceptional therapeutic skills, yet leading, supervising, or managing others requires a whole new set of competencies not covered in graduate school. Our Authentic Leadership Group is here to help you become the authentic and wholehearted leader you aspire to be. And we believe this journey is best undertaken with the guidance of experienced mentors alongside fellow learners. Authentic Leaders will run February 2024 through September, meeting once monthly on Fridays for 90 minutes. Join me in this journey of self-discovery and leadership mastery, where you'll enhance your leadership skills and forge meaningful connections with fellow therapists who are committed to their own growth and the betterment of the therapy field. To join me and start registration, go to www.headheartbiztherapy.com/authentic-leaders-group. That's headheartbiztherapy.com/authentic-leaders-group. Hey, Olive, welcome to Conversations with a Wounded Healer.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, how you doing?
I'm doing well. It's been a busy week, but also felt pretty scatterbrained this week as well, which has been quite fun to navigate and deal with. But I've had a lot of conversations with friends and clients who have also felt the same, which is always quite validating.
There's something's going on right now because I've
Mm.
I've been feeling that as well, and a lot of my clients have been saying the same thing. So,
Right. Yeah. Like I'm not super clued up on astrology, but one of my friends was telling me that there's Mercury retrograde and then also there's like five other planets in
oh,
alignment. So I was like, oh, okay.
yeah, I don't know
Makes
much. My
sense.
co-host, when she listens to the episode and we record the intro, will be able to comment on this because she knows. But yeah, if many things are in retrograde, then I think that's a thing.
Yeah, intense.
Yeah. So, Olive, I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Cool. Okay. So I guess in the broadest sense, I am a coach. So from two ends of the spectrum, I'm a yoga teacher and I'm also more recently a personal trainer. I don't necessarily align with the word personal trainer
Okay.
for various reasons. So I like to say strength coach. However, it's less obvious, I guess, what that entails
Mhm.
sometimes. So I just use those kind of phrases. But yeah, I teach yoga, I teach strength and weightlifting, and I like to explore sort of everything in between. So from general kind of floor work and movement to mobility practices to handstands to animal flow. I like to cover a range of different
Mhm.
things because from my personal background, that's what I like to do. So whatever I like to do, I like to share with my students and my clients as well.
Mm.
And my approach quite often is to lead with curiosity and to explore things with this idea of playfulness and to just tap into the inner child because conversations that I've had recently with a lot of people and a lot of students is how their first-hand experiences when it came to physical education was pretty negative, and they had a really negative framework around movement, around their body, around just sort of like sports and training, which has been carried on into their adult life. So a big part of what I do is sort of breaking down those barriers that they've had, reframing their perspective, working with a more positive, like playful attitude with that.
Mhm.
So that's ultimately what I want to facilitate through my coaching. But yeah.
So I love this. And so Olive and I know each other because well, until recently, taught at the same yoga studio.
Yes.
And I actually took over one of the classes that you were giving up.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it was actually a very sort of seamless flow into me
Mm.
teaching because I teach very similarly to you in that it's
Yeah.
curiosity, it's exploration. It's like, let's bring our inner child
Mm.
into this class and like, what happens if you move like this? What happens if you move while you're doing this? And yeah,
Mhm.
just inviting that like self-compassion and making it a little bit fun. And I think that
Yeah.
I've been to your classes and what I have found
Mm.
as a student in one of your classes is that I quite often go, "Oh, wait, I never thought to move my shoulder like that when I'm
Mm.
in this place," or I would have just sat here in stillness because I didn't even think about the fact that I have the option to move my body however I want to. And your sort of encouraging of that
Mhm.
curiosity really helps restore agency and, yeah, safe curiosity with your own body, my
Mm.
own body, anyone's own body, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. That's like it's really nice to hear that as well from someone else because sometimes it's really easy to get in my own head about what I'm teaching and what I'm delivering. Like,
Mm.
there can be moments where I have, like, the inner critic is very, very strong, and it's like, "Does this even make any conceptual sense
Mm.
to anyone?" And I think I've started to unpack and understand why recently. So, my sort of journey into teaching was, I guess, fairly unconventional. I grew up doing, like, a lot of sport at school. I was always training, I was always moving, always competing, and then I taught myself yoga for about 4.5 years,
Mm.
and the way that I taught myself was literally by screenshotting images that I had seen off these big yoga accounts on Instagram and just trying to recreate the shapes that they have.
Wow.
So, yeah, there were, like, 3 particular people that I used to follow, and ironically, they all lived in Dubai, which is where I grew up. So I was like, "Oh, cool, there are people in Dubai practicing yoga," and so, yeah, I basically ended up creating, like, a backlog of all these screenshots, trying to figure out how I could get into the movement, and eventually, I was able to kind of compile my own flow with, like, what I had kind of learned.
Mhm.
And I would, like, film myself as well to be able to, like, watch back and observe my shapes and things because obviously there was no teacher there
Yeah.
to tell me what I was kinda doing. So I was just, like, doing my own thing, and that kind of lasted for 4.5 years, and over time, I think I maybe watched 1 or 2 YouTube videos, but didn't really get on with what I saw. I went to a couple of classes, but again, I was a bit confused. I didn't understand a lot of the concepts like pranayama, like chanting. I just kinda wanted to move, and the teachers or the classes that I went to didn't really facilitate how I wanted to experience things. And then after I finished uni, I went to do my yoga training because I wanted to have a little bit more formal education with it.
Mhm.
I wanted to learn about the history, I wanted to learn about the breath and the wider components other than just yoga asana. And when I was there, I was like, "Okay, cool. Yeah, I like this," but I found aspects of some of the teaching quite challenging, a little bit restrictive
Mm.
because I did Ashtanga.
Okay.
And
So
so quite regimented.
explain why that's funny for people who may not
Yeah.
know what that
So Ashtanga is it can be a very great practice, don't get me wrong,
Mm,
it, gave me a lot very early on, but it's the same postures every single time you do the flow, every time you do the sequence, so it's incredibly regimented, and if you go to a traditional kind of teacher, if you cannot execute, quotation marks, the pose
mm,
how they want you to execute it to its end range. You're not allowed to progress past to the next pose, which in my head is like way too restrictive and is
yeah.
way too problematic. So I don't agree with that. Even when I teach modified Ashtanga, it's so entirely
Mhm.
different. And I know you're very, very similar. So yeah, I was like, okay, cool, I'll take it for what it is. But then when it came to my own teaching, very, very early on, I was quite experimental with how I taught. And again, I never really had like a mentor or a teacher that I continuously went back to. So now, like, circling back to my original point, the way that I teach is the way that I wish I was taught. And it's from not having that kind of role model to look up to. That sounds really egotistical. I'm my own role model,
No,
but do you know what I mean?
well, I 100% agree actually because I've kind of felt the same thing. The way I teach is the way I
Mm.
was I wish the whatever. We all know what I'm
Yeah.
trying to say. So, and I think because you either get people who are really, really regimented, whether it's Ashtanga or not, people who are like, this posture must look perfect, your heels need to be on the
Mm.
floor, or, whatever. Or you get people who are almost too loose in some ways,
Mm.
where there's
Mhm.
not enough structure to, or maybe not enough guidance. So I've had a lot from different
Yeah.
polarities, but until I moved to Brighton, actually, I never really had teachers who were kind of encouraging this curious embodiment. So I really hear you when you say, like, I wish I was taught like this.
Mm.
And I'm really curious, I wanna come back to this idea of you taking screenshots and making videos of yourself, because my brain
Mm.
went to, were you really self-critical with that? Or what was that like
Ah.
for you as you were doing that? Were
Mm.
you looking at yourself with compassion? Were you looking at yourself with a perfectionist? Like, what was going on there?
Yeah. So this is interesting because this was right at the start of my eating disorder.
Okay.
And like prior to that, like grown up, I still have like body dysmorphia. So right at the start, it was like a comparison thing. And I was like desiring creating these particular shapes. At the time, I was also over exercising as well. And I think a lot of the time I just wanted to I could quite easily dissociate between just creating the shapes and the way that my body looked if I
Mm.
wanted to,
Mhm.
but it was definitely also driven like, "Cool, let's see if I can, like, create this with my body," and
Mm.
there were definitely thoughts of like, "Oh, if I can do this and make this, and my body's gonna look like, the 3 people that I saw, and
Mhm.
it's gonna change, and it's gonna become like this." And it's taken me a long time to obviously realize, that anatomically, I'm very, very different to those
Mm.
individuals,
Yeah.
and bone structure and the way that you hold muscle, the way that you hold fat is so individualistic, but as that wounded 17, 18-year-old seeing that, and then when my shape didn't reflect theirs, it was quite hard to deal with, and
Mhm.
that's really interesting you picked up on that because I haven't really thought about that in a long time. But
Mm.
yeah.
It's so yeah, my brain immediately went to, especially as a teenager, if
Mm,
I were doing that, I know that
mm,
I would have been, and this, I didn't struggle with an eating disorder, but I absolutely struggled with
mm,
like the shape my body was, and like, having
mm.
like my boobs grew in really early. And I was
Yeah.
really self-conscious about that and really like, so yeah, that's exactly where my brain went. And it's interesting to hear.
Mm,
Now I'm curious about the way that, because you're so body focused and using different sort of bodily methods, I guess, of
Mm,
healing, of working with others,
yeah.
how that supported you through your eating disorder, if that's something you're willing to kind of share
Mm.
with us.
Yeah. I'm a pretty, open book when it comes to talking about this because it happened, when I was 18. I'm now 27, so it happened, a long time
Mm,
ago, and the individual I was then is fairly unrecognizable
mm,
because so much has happened in that period of time. It feels like a lifetime ago. And it's really interesting to look back at photos of myself from that time and be completely detached from it. And it's weird because I would never ever lead with a regret or think about it being a regretful time of my life. There was a lot of hurt that I put on myself and my family members, but it ultimately also, in a really weird, twisted way, led me to where I am now.
yeah.
Yeah. So, can we go back to your point because I completely sidetracked and I was like,
No, though you were actually, like, going with my question was around,
perfect.
I guess, the journey from eating disorder
Mm,
to coaching other people and
mm,
supporting body positivity and
yeah.
strength and
Yeah.
curiosity, and, like, I would say safe exploration of your own body.
Yeah, I think having gone through that, it's perhaps in part easier to empathize when clients have those existing frameworks in their head
Mhm.
as well, or if they've had their own journey with it. So what I always try to listen, which is always the first thing, right? Whenever it comes to people navigating these kinds of spaces. But the biggest thing for me, I guess, it's more prevalent in clients who come to me to train at the gym because there's always these connotations around getting a personal trainer. It's like, oh, I want to go for weight loss, I want to go for fat loss, I'm going to be on a diet and it's going to be super, super restrictive. If I'm being really directly honest, I cannot give a shit about any of those
Yeah.
things. I'm not the coach to come to if you want weight loss or fat loss or you want to be on top of your nutrition. By all means, if you want that stuff, go for it. But I'm really not the person for that. I'm not interested in it, and I'm also not. I'm happy to say that I'm not that well versed in
Mm,
that kind of sphere.
mhm.
My main interest is moving, reframing your perspective around things, reclaiming your own power with your body, learning
Mm.
a better perspective, and also just feeling fucking strong. That's the main
Such
thing,
a vibe.
you
What
know?
does feeling strong feel like to you?
Feeling strong is being able to just literally do anything. The way that I like to think about it, the way I like to think about my clients is they're athletes. They're training, the way they're moving is to just be able to do anything, to be able to go run down the street, to be able to jump over a wall, or to be able to pick up something heavy. It's stuff that obviously transfers in day-to-day life, but walking up the stairs and not feeling out of breath, or doing things that you never thought you could do and just feeling solid in your body.
Mm,
And also, of course, there are comments as well that come in from other people when you do start to train. It's you look strong.
mm,
I love that. One of my clients this week, she actually said to me, I've been training Krista for about 2.5 months now. And that's kind of around the time where visible changes start to come in and other people start to pick up. And she was like, Olive, one of my boyfriend's mom said to me that you're looking really strong. And I was like, hell yeah,
hell
dude.
yeah.
We love that. That is the kind of affirming comment we want to hear. So yeah, when it comes to training my clients, I'm just like, dude, I just want you to feel strong as fuck. That's the main thing. Do you know what I mean?
But I love that because, I've gone to personal trainers before where I'm filling out this
Mm,
big long sheet about how much weight
mm,
I want to lose, which is I'm going to tell you right now, I have weighed pounds for the past
mhm.
probably 10 years, and my body has looked massively different during those 10
Mhm,
years.
mhm.
And you can look at pictures of me 10 years ago and go, that's not what you look like now, but I weighed the exact same. Right. So, I
Wow,
have given
crazy.
up on this. I stopped weighing myself, because,
Mm,
is what my body is trying to weigh, regardless of how much
mhm.
muscle or non-muscle or, whatever is going on. That's just, I'm not trying to fight it,
Yeah, yeah.
And, how much fat do you want to lose? I don't know.
Mm,
It's sometimes it's just trying to be there. Like, like, I need it. Sometimes we need fat
Literally.
on our bodies, and,
Right?
I think I have gone through this idea of, like,
Mm.
yeah, like, "Oh, I should lose a lot of fat, and I should lose a lot," and I'm like,
Mm.
but I've noticed, like, sometimes when I lose fat off of my body, I'm like, I
Mm.
don't actually feel as functional, or I'm not,
Mhm.
like, I
Yeah.
can fit into this thing better, but, like, I don't feel as okay,
Yeah.
and so there's these
Yeah.
ideas of, like, losing fat and losing weight is
Mm.
gonna make you look better and feel better, but that's not always true.
Mhm. 100%. And, like, for a little bit of perspective, so when I was at my lowest weight, at that 18-year-old version of me, like, she was kilos, and I'm now, like, I haven't weighed myself in a while, but I'm about, like,
Okay, that
yeah,
that is
it's not good.
well, it's, but it also I think it speaks to your transformation in so many ways, like
Hmm. Yeah, like, at the time, I thought I was gonna be significantly happier when, I got that thigh gap, I had, like, a flat belly,
mm,
blah, 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 but the reality was that I was, like, so exhausted all the time, I was so cold, I was always, like,
mm,
hungry, food was always on my mind, like, movement for me back then, like, the yoga and the gym was in essence a form of punishment,
mm,
and I know that's a framework that a lot of people unfortunately still are navigating, but it was like I didn't do it because I intrinsically enjoyed it. I did it because I was like, I feel like I have to. I feel like I got to burn off all the food that I ate. And like, there was like deep loathing that I had for the way that I looked, even though I hit my ideal like thigh gap
mm,
and I was at my lowest weight. Whereas now, like, I'm obviously like a hell of a lot heavier. I've regained the weight that I need to have on my body, but I'm arguably so much happier and I move genuinely for the pure enjoyment of it.
mhm,
Like, whenever I step in the gym, I also I've now got reached a point where I just eat what I want to eat. It's taken
mhm,
me a long time to navigate
mhm.
there, but it's fine. But yeah, I train now because I'm like, well, it's fucking cool as hell to be able to do so many different things. Like, why wouldn't I want to?
That sounds like a
You know?
celebration of your body.
Exactly, exactly. And, it's taken me time to get there. And I understand that everyone's on their own little journey and it will take people time. Sometimes, it will take a lot longer for others. But if I can be there as like a small facilitator of that,
Mhm.
I'm all here for it.
Mm.
But yeah,
Yeah.
hell yeah.
Thinking of starting your own private practice? Join me for a 2-day in-person training providing what you need to start your own practice on November 9th and 10th in Chicago. The thought of running your own practice can be scary for some, but with a few expert tips, it can be a breeze. This NASW course will provide an overview of what you need to start and maintain a private practice. It will be an action-packed 2 days where you'll learn the business 101s, build your brand, and create a marketing plan. Participants will leave the course with sample forms, actionable next steps to build a thriving business, and 12 CEUs. The cost is $159 for NASW members and $199 for non-members. Visit tinyurl.com/NASW private practice to register. That's tinyurl.com/NASW private practice.
Well, how do you feel about the term wounded healer?
Hmm. I think it's interesting because I've never thought of myself as that.
Mhm.
So it's interesting to now think of myself in that kind of framework.
Mhm.
I don't think I would ever describe myself as a wounded healer,
Mhm.
but yeah, there are definitely parts of me that, like that 18-year-old version, was so hurt and
Mm.
wounded by things that had happened. And I've grown past that and I have healed from it. But, like, as we all know, healing is still a very, very up and down journey. It's never,
Yeah.
ever linear. So we're still on it. And there's still, periods of time, like literally just last week, where I was like, oh, I can feel those little, like, dark thoughts in the back of my brain wanting to come forwards
Mhm.
and like they're just like, "Hi, we're still here." I'm like, "Okay." You are, so it's like acknowledging that. But for the most part, there has been massive amounts of growth. I think wounded healer, it helps to create like a little bit more context as well.
Mm.
If I was to say to someone like, I'm a wounded healer or something, people are like, okay, cool. She's kind of gone through some shit, but she's out the other end now. So yeah, it helps to create context, but I don't know if I would ever use it to describe myself.
Yeah, that's fair. The reason
Mm.
I asked it then was I think I was thinking
Mm.
about, it's not a term I would necessarily ever use for myself either, but I was thinking about what the term means in general, or like how I
Mm.
would define the term. And I was thinking about the idea of turning what was something painful into your superpower.
That's cool. I like that. Yeah.
And I think what you're telling us is that's what you've done. And then
Mm.
not only your
Yeah.
superpower, but then using that superpower to support others
Mhm.
in the
Mhm.
same vein.
Yeah. No, I like that. I like that perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's really nice.
And I think it's also, what you said about like, oh, yep, the other day those thoughts were kind of there.
Mm.
That's so important to hear. Not important to hear, it's important to say. Because I say to my clients all the time, like, you know, they think that some of my, my therapy clients will think that like they'll hit some magic point where these thoughts just don't
Mm.
come back anymore. And I'm like, I'm going to tell you right now, after all the therapy I've done and becoming a therapist myself, I still get them.
Mhm. Mhm.
There might be some magical point, but I haven't hit it. And I don't think my therapist has hit it. And her therapist
Yeah.
hasn't hit it. And I think normalizing the idea that we never hit these points where like everything is just fine
Mm.
and easy and like, we're free of the it's more learning to manage it and how to
Mhm.
self-support when those moments come up.
Yeah, absolutely. And like the way that I've thought about this is that there are like the peaks and then the troughs with that. And then over the years, the troughs have gotten smaller and smaller because I've been able to
Mm,
like observe it and notice it quicker, and I have better tools in my box to like kind of pull myself out of it, whether that's like through self-regulation or through like reaching out through community or like whatever it is, but they're smaller and less drawn out.
mhm,
But yeah, it's a really good point to make, to like to vocalize these things, because I think sometimes as well, when you're in a position like as a coach or as a therapist, people expect you to like be so up there with having done all the work and you're never ever going to be affected by things.
mhm.
Like the amount of times, and I'm sure that you've had this as well, the amount of times when people are like, oh my God, you must be so zen because you're a yoga teacher, or you must like never ever get stressed. And I'm like,
No, I was rushing to get here today and I'm like huffing and puffing and stressed out just getting here.
literally, I'm like, my guy, like, I'm not gonna bring in my shit to the yoga class. Like, it's, I've brought in a different version of me to not then push it
Yeah.
onto you. So what you're seeing is very, very different. So I'm like, I try to be as real as I can with my clients. Like today on a call that I literally just had before this, and my client was like, "Oh, how are you doing?" I was like, "Dude, honestly, it's been a week."
Yeah.
And it's like showcasing that I am just another human being. I'm
Mhm.
a real individual. I'm not on a pedestal or anything like that. Like, I don't really like to see hierarchy as well when I work
Mhm.
with my clients. I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm on the same fucking page as you. It just so happens that this is my line of work and this is my profession, and I'm just showing to you, what I've learned. And I think as well that then creates a safer space for them to be playful, to be, tapping into their inner child, to be curious, because it's no longer like this weird disparity between us.
Mm, that is
Yeah.
so I think that especially when it comes to yoga, there's,
Mhm.
like the teacher knows everything and like the teacher can just like jump up into a handstand and like whatever,
Mm.
and you see other people in the class and it's, I love the phrase comparison is the thief of joy.
Oh my god.
It's such
This is like my favorite quote.
and it's so true, but it doesn't make it easier to not compare yourself. And I
Yeah.
think I've been doing yoga on and off for the past almost 20 years and
Mm.
regularly probably for the past like 8, 9-ish.
Mhm.
And I think it was only in the past year and a half where I'm able to go into a yoga class and not compare what I'm doing to somebody else.
Yeah, shit.
So one of the things I like to do when I teach is if I'm demonstrating something, I say, "It took me 5 years to figure out how to do this." Because I
Mhm,
wish my
mhm.
teachers that I've had in the past would have said that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Or
yeah.
I love when people are like, "I have a dancing background, so I'm naturally more flexible," because I
Mhm,
look at someone's back bend and I'm like, How's that even physically possible?" Or
mhm.
I love when people say, "I lift weights. It's easier for me to push up into some of these things because,"
Mhm.
'cause it helps us understand, like, nobody's body just magically
Mhm.
can do everything.
And that's, like, what I try to say to, like, students. I'm like, "Look, anatomically, we're all very,
Mm,
very different, genetically as well, and that plays such a huge role in, flexibility or general strength and everything like that." And I try to say, like, the shapes that I create are not going to look the same on you,
mhm,
and that's absolutely fine. But it's still something. I think in Brighton, the yoga community here is quite different to other
mhm,
places where people really do encourage, like, this curiosity and be like, "No, it's very, very individualistic," because there's still the wider narrative whenever I have a new client, like, again, literally happened today. I always ask students, injuries, new updates
mhm,
like that, any concerns? And then the second question I always ask is, what's your experience with practicing yoga? Majority of the time, people are like, "Oh, but I'm just really not that flexible," and or "I can't touch my toes. I'm really, really stiff." And I'm like, "Honestly, I couldn't give a shit." Like, in the nicest way, I don't care. I don't care if you can't touch your toes. Like, flexibility is not a prerequisite
mhm,
to do the
mhm,
practice. You gotta come into it with an open mind, but I also appreciate, on the other hand, if all you've ever been exposed to with yoga is these, like, mad back bends or, like, splits and stuff online or through other
mhm,
classes, or, like, the previous teachers you've been to where they've not really spoken about differences. Of course, you're gonna have
mhm.
that, like, approach to it. So again, like, through my teaching, I try to, like, gently deconstruct that and be like, "It doesn't matter if you're not flexible, blah, blah, blah." Do you know what I mean?
Man, some days I wake up and I can't touch my own toes.
Do you know what I mean?
I tell my clients that too. I'm like, "Y'all, I'm stiff today. I went for a run, and, like, maybe I can't demonstrate this for you today because here's what's going on for
Mhm.
me," without, bringing my own shit into it. But, like,
Yeah, yeah,
you need
yeah.
to know that I'm listening to my body, and
Mhm.
you need to know
Mhm.
that you're the expert in your own body.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
I don't know what's going on inside of you, and I can't
Mhm.
tell you what's better and it's your like, you got your own thing
Mhm.
going on, and I can just give you ideas and recommendations, but at the end of the day
Mhm.
and I'm curious how do you work with that when you're helping people weight train?
So with, like, weight training, there are obviously some specific things that you've got to look at because you've got extra resistance. There
Mhm.
are more regimented ways in
Mm.
which to move, but, like, everything can be adapted depending on leverages and, like, femur length, for
Mhm.
example, or even, like, your wingspan and stuff like that. It just looks slightly different on different people. So,
Mm.
for example, like, when I'm squatting with a barbell on my back, my positioning looks really, really upright
Mhm.
because I've got quite a short torso. Whereas someone who has a slightly longer torso, their positioning, they have to lean a lot further forwards to
Mm.
facilitate, like, a more optimal bar path. So I've had, like, clients before where they were like, "Yeah, but do I not need to be more upright?" I'm like, "No, because you gotta look at your anatomy
Mhm.
and how it actually works for you."
Mhm.
So there is, like, a methodology to kind of follow, but again, it's loose and you do have to just work with the individual as
Mm.
well. And just some things take a little bit longer. Like, when I first started PTing, things that, like, naturally might have come easy to me don't for some of the clients,
Mhm.
and that's fine. Like, for example, walking lunges. A walking lunge, because, like, we do so many lunges in yoga, I think I was just used to it. But, like, a walking lunge with weights, you're looking at coordination, you're looking at balance, you're looking at knee stability, and like there's so many different moving components. So it's a lot of the time personal training is about patience with people learning the movements and just taking their time with it and allowing them to understand the movement patterns first before adding like weights to it.
Mm.
Weight obviously helps to a degree, but I'm never going to be like, whack on more on that barbell. Let's like go for gold. Do you know what I mean? I'm like, I'd rather you feel safe and comfortable.
So that yeah, and that's kind of what I was curious about in terms of, like,
Mm,
adding weight, because I think naturally a lot of people would
mm,
be like, "You got it, let's add it, let's go, come on, like, push, push,
yeah.
push." But you don't really give me the push, 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 like, "Let's just chuck some weight
No.
on there" vibe.
Yeah.
I love that you used walking lunges as an example because I actually fall over when I can't like, it's just
Yeah, man.
for all my core stability, walking lunges, I can't. I mean, not with that attitude, I
Yeah.
can't. I can, they're just difficult for me,
They are, they
and
are.
and that's even, with all this stuff but walking lunges.
Mhm, mhm,
So, one of the yoga practices that I'm trained in. It's called trauma sensitive yoga,
mhm,
and it's different from trauma informed yoga. And it's a
mhm,
specific practice that works with a lot of permission and consent.
mhm,
And you never touch your clients, you actually stay on the mat the whole time. And what you're doing is just offering, you're welcome to raise your arm. This is an invitation
mm,
to lower your arm. So you're letting people have
mm,
agency over their body and they get to decide if they choose that movement or not choose
mhm.
that movement. And I've experienced that in your yoga classes in some ways, and I'm wondering
Mm,
where you see agency in weight training specifically, because I think we don't necessarily
mm.
think about that.
Yeah, I think when it comes to weight training, there are a couple different ways that you can sort of engage with clients and ask them about feedback. So whenever we finish a lift, I'm always like, "Cool, how did that feel in your body?"
Mm,
Like it kind of comes back to the way that I teach. I'm like, "Okay, how did that feel?" They're like, "Yeah, I felt like this engagement." I'm like, "Okay, cool." And then I tend to use something called an RPE scale, so rate of perceived exertion. It's a
mm,
scale of like 0 to 10, 0 being I could have done that in my sleep, 10 being like I'm about to die, that was so exhausting.
mhm,
So sometimes like I'm like, "Okay, cool. On the RPE scale, where would you have put that lift?" And it's for like effort, right? So if some people are like, "Oh, that was probably about a 5 or 6." I'm like, "Okay, cool." So if you felt like that, there's an opportunity to explore an increase in weight if you wanted to. So I give them that option, I give them that opportunity and let them know that it's there. But I'm always like, "Look, if you don't wanna go up, that's not a problem. I'm
mhm,
never gonna push you for that." And all of the time people are like, "Okay, cool. I'm pretty comfortable with that. Like, why don't we take it there?" And I always try to explain a little bit of theory with it as well. Say,
mm,
for example, you're doing 10 reps off a barbell back squat. If your last 2 reps are a little bit more of a grind, if they're a little bit slower, maybe we stick to the same weight or we even drop it down.
mhm,
Like, now's not necessarily the time to increase the weight if the last 2 are a little bit more of a struggle
mhm,
and there's a breakdown in form. So, I try to explain theory on top of them listening to internal cueing and even external cueing to give them that autonomy over their choice. Because again, ultimately, I don't want to have to be someone's in-person coach forever
mhm,
because then I've not done my job.
mm,
I wanna give people, all the tools that they need and the understanding they need to eventually, like, do it themselves. I can create a program like hands off
yeah.
for sure and, like, give that to them, but I want them to learn the movement themselves and feel empowered through that and not kind of, like, have me as a "crutch," quote unquote.
Yeah, I love that. My friend told me recently that their therapist said they're in the
Mhm.
business of making themselves unemployed.
Nice.
And, like, I low key love that. Like, I would love,
Yeah.
if you wanna stay in therapy forever, great, but, like, I don't want you to need my
Mm,
services forever. I want you to,
right.
and I think that I hear that in what you're saying. Like, I want you
Mhm.
to feel the confidence to be able to go out and do this on your own and, like, build, I've given you the tools, like, I want
Yeah.
you to build this on your own. And I think that in any type of teacher or coach is so important because the moment you try to
Mm,
make somebody relying reliant, there we go. The moment you try to make someone reliant on you, there's a power imbalance.
Yeah, exactly, and then that circles back to, like, the whole hierarchy thing as
Mm.
well, right? Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah.
Talk to me about what advice would you give to women or queer folks, trans
Mm.
people, non-binary people going into the gym in what is traditionally a very like male-dominated space?
So this is really interesting you bring this up because I'm in the really early stages of hopefully planning and executing something that is gonna cater towards, like, the LGBTQ+ and BIPOC community in Brighton, specifically around this.
Yay!
So it's actually something that I've been working on this week, so it's, like, super fresh in my mind. So, it's obviously it can be a very, very challenging space to enter into, which is traditionally very, very mask
Yeah.
dominated by male presenting people, and it can be incredibly intimidating and unfamiliar, especially if you don't see other role models there. So by role model, I don't mean like this fucking like fitfluencer on
Yeah.
Instagram. I just mean your average person who kind of maybe looks like you or
Mhm.
is in part of the same community as you. And I think I don't know. I'm still trying to figure out how I got to a place where I'm very, very comfortable in the gym. I think early on it was pure stubbornness with
Mm.
over exercising and just being like, yeah, I'm here. And that kind of clouding like my thoughts and judgments with
Mhm.
it. Because I always used to train in like some real grotty gyms,
Mhm.
like where they were like bodybuilders and all of this. And I was like, I don't give a fuck. Because I had my own agenda. But over the years, I have noticed, like, the way that I tend to navigate a space like this, and it's more of a coping mechanism. I always have my headphones plugged
Mhm.
in, so I never really hear, like, external environment noise, but I also have the worst lifting bitch face ever. I look hella unapproachable. And in part, it's because I'm really concentrating on what I'm doing,
Uh-huh.
particularly with Olympic lifting. Like when I'm pulling the barbell over my head, like I'm concentrating like hell, you know?
Yeah.
So whether or not those are coping mechanisms, that those are the things that have helped me sort of get really comfortable in the gym. And I'm now at a space where I don't need to rely on them. But for individuals who are wanting to get into the gym and it's an intimidating environment, I would say, first of all, like perhaps find a coach that you want to work with or that you really, really trust to
Mhm.
bring you into that space in a safe, in a controlled way, who can teach you and show you how to use all the various equipment.
Mhm.
Or secondly, at least if that's not, like, readily available to you, then perhaps, like, go with a friend,
Mhm.
again, that you trust, that you get on with, and try to navigate the space together.
Mhm.
Again, in a very similar kind of manner like I did to the way that I taught myself yoga, I taught myself lifting
Mhm.
really, really early on. Like, I was on bodybuilding.com, and I was just looking at all those form videos, and I was like, "Okay, cool. This exercise is for biceps, this is for deltoids,
Mhm.
this is for glutes, this is for quads." And I learned myself.
Mhm.
Perhaps that's again, like, the curiosity that I had coming from the sporting background that, I was used to, but it really helped me feel confident
Mhm.
as well. So maybe that's an avenue as well to go down, or at least if it's not a big commercial gym that you want to go to, finding a slightly smaller, more like bespoke gym, community led gym
Mhm.
where you feel comfortable and safe. Like we've got a couple around Brighton where it's like small group
Mhm.
PT or
Yeah.
small group coaching, and they're really, really beneficial because you get quite close with the coach, you get close with the other people, and it's a less intimidating environment. So
Mhm.
there are a couple different options to kind of explore.
I really like this idea of creating your own way of whether it's, having a what did you say? A lifting bitch face? Like,
Lifting bitch
having your own
face.
like, or putting your headphones in.
Mm,
The last gym that I worked out at in Chicago before I moved,
mhm.
I chose it because my trapeze teacher was there, and I would work out with him.
Sick.
But I would go there on my own because it was near my house, but it was where a lot of police officers worked out, and I remember just being
Oh.
like, out of sheer stubbornness, I am taking up space in your fucking gym because I bet you're out there
Hell
causing all kinds of
yeah.
problems. And I would just be like running on the treadmill with like stink face or like, I can't pick up things as heavy as you can, but at least, it's like I was creating all these
Yeah.
narratives in my head about like how I was somehow righting the wrongs, like
Dude, I love
balancing
that.
injustice. But it helped me take up space in that gym where I was
Yeah,
surrounded by police officers.
that's it.
So, I mean, like, create a narrative, I think, about
Mhm.
your situation or yeah.
Yeah. And, like, also, that is the main thing, right? In these spaces that aren't, traditionally for everyone, the biggest thing and the biggest, like, form of protest is to take up space,
Yes, yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Take up that space and, like, don't be afraid to, like, walk around and, like, even if you feel like you're putting on a little bit of an alter ego, if
Mhm.
that's what helps you kind of, like, navigate it, then freaking go for it. Like, that's how I'm very, very comfortable in, like, the powerlifting, Olympic lifting area in
Mhm.
my gym, but when I have to go into the bodybuilding section, I step into a slightly different role where, like, I can feel my posture changing and the way that I strut around, and I'm like, I don't give a fuck. Like, I'm here, I'm taking up that space, and I'm allowed to use the equipment just as much as, like, anyone else right
Mhm.
now. And that feels really good. And it's always really, really interesting to see other people's responses to that
Mhm.
as well and be like, "Oh, yeah, cool." And, my favorite thing recently has been I've been in the lifting area, like, loads over the past, like, 5.5 years that I've been in Brighton at my gym, and more recently, it's only been women there and femme presenting people,
Come
and I'm like,
on.
hell yeah. It's super, super cool to see and to see how it's changed over the years as well. And just seeing like women and more femme presenting people feeling more comfortable
Mhm.
taking up that
Yeah.
space in the gym environment as well. So, yeah, I think social media has probably done bits for that, but we're still like a long way off
Yeah, for
from
sure.
creating like equality,
Sure.
you
And
know?
I think I'm gonna throw this in here for cis
Mhm.
women, and I don't know
Mhm.
how this affects trans and non-binary folks based on hormone
Mhm.
fluctuations, but for cis
Mm.
women, weightlifting is one of the best things you can do to balance your hormones and to
Yeah.
ensure a nice transition into perimenopause and menopause. So
Mhm.
it's super,
Mhm.
like just think about your hot flashes, people. Like think about the future of your hot flashes. I'm not there yet, but I think
Yeah.
about that now. I'm like,
Mhm.
am I trying to be like my mom who's got her fan out
Mhm.
and like no shade to my mom, it's like but she's pulling her fan out and she's sweating balls everywhere she goes. And I'm like,
Yeah.
if I pick up a heavy thing now, can I
Mhm.
avoid some of that in
Yeah.
20, 30 years? 30 years. My mom's 30 years older than me.
And I also think, like, times are starting to change where you step into a gym environment and it'd be a real obvious split between, like, who was using the cardio
Mm,
equipment and who was using, like, the bodybuilding and weightlifting equipment. And that's because of diet culture
mhm.
and because, women were told to be as small as possible, and if you lifted a weight, you were suddenly gonna blow up like Arnie. And, like, the reality of that, like, honestly, whenever someone says that to me, I really have to hold in a laugh because I don't think people actually realize how difficult it is to reach that point of like muscular hypertrophy. Like people who are bodybuilders are in there like 2, maybe even 3 times a day. The amount of food that they're eating as well, like their maintenance, like is absolutely
Yeah, yeah.
insane. So like you picking up a weight twice a week, you're not gonna like, blow up. But I get that that's such a stigma that we have from diet culture, but it's starting to slowly, slowly shift and change, which is dope.
Olive, tell us where we can find you online.
Yeah, so to keep everything incredibly easy, all my social media, so my Instagram, my YouTube, my website, my Facebook is all just Yoga with Olive.
Love it.
And I did have a podcast way back in the day with my friend Grace, and it was called the Chaturanga Podcast
Oh,
because we used to chat.
I get it.
But that's, yeah.
Okay,
Little play
a
on
little
words,
clever.
but that's been dormant for a couple years. But what I enjoyed about that was that we got to speak to other coaches as well in the sphere and kind of learn about their journey. But for the most part, it's just yoga with Olive.
All right. And I highly recommend looking up some of Olive's videos. And I love the little movement snacks.
Thank you.
So Olive is just going to give you some really creative ways of moving and looking at your body and like little bite-sized things that you can do. Just like get up off the couch real quick. And I love that.
Yeah.
Highly recommend.
Again, it doesn't have to be like a big serious thing, right? It can just be 5 minutes when you're boiling the kettle.
Yeah. Last question, Olive. Grilled cheese sandwiches. Would you call them grilled cheese sandwiches or would you call them cheese toasties?
Oh, shit. I would probably say grilled cheese sandwiches because I grew up in Dubai and there was a lot of more American pop cultural references. Yeah.
That's
cheese toasties. I'm like,
No, this is a question we ask as well because my co-host found out that they call it cheese toasties in the UK. So we're asking anyone who I interview over here. Yeah.
And like in a really weird way, a grilled cheese sandwich sounds more delicious than a cheese toastie.
Oh, 100%. You get a better image, but maybe that's just because we're consuming American media.
So the cheese toastie is giving me dryness, and I don't want that.
Well, to be fair, a cheese toastie is probably pretty dry because if someone who calls, sorry, I'm not going to shit on British cooking today. That's not what we're here for.
We can, though, but,
We'll save that for another time. And Olive, maybe we'll have you back after you launch this project that you kind of mentioned, because I'm very curious and excited to hear about that. And it sounds like it's going to do great things.
Here's hoping.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being on today. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you so much for having me, Ab.
Yeah.
And yeah, I'm really looking forward to chatting again.
Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks to our guest for an amazing conversation today. To find out more about today's guest, you can visit www.headheartbiztherapy.com/podcast.
You can find Sarah at Head Heart Biz Therapy on Facebook and Instagram.
And you can find Anne at Spare Room Wellness or spareroomwellness.com.
Thanks as always to Andrea Klunder and the Creative Imposter Studios for editing, to Liam O'Donnell for the album art, and to Ben Mueller for our theme music. Until next time, bye-bye!